Hi, my name is Alex, and today I'm going to be presenting um, on air pollution and the different styles governments can use to help reduce said pollution. So, the key concept here is that cleaner fuels and emission control technologies can help to reduce industrial air pollution, um, and regulations and economic incentives that can help spur innovation and will decrease the true cost of energy production over time. However, they do or they may raise the cost of providing energy or doing business. This is one of the reasons that environmental policy is lagging behind many countries because of the initial upfront costs involved in such, and the short sightedness involved is due to many factors, such as our political cycle, where politicians are incentivized to look past long term goals and focus on objectives that can be passed before their next shot at reelection. So, for example, a president of the United States would aim to have projects that can be completed within the 4 year term that they have so that they can show that they're able to get projects done and win re-elections rather than long overarching schemes that take decades to complete and are much more expensive in the long run. It's just one of the things that comes with uh, our democracy. So the next slide is about how we can reduce outdoor air pollution. The first of which is called command and control regulation. It's a type of regulation that involves setting an upper allowable limit on the pollution that is released, and it is enforced with fines and or incarceration. So an example of this would be the Clean Air Act passed by Richard Nixon. Um, Basically, the government is doing the commanding and controlling of the air, and they set a limit on how much air pollution an individual or a company can produce. And if you go over that, you will receive fines. And if you have a gross negligence, something like I can't really think of any air examples off of the top of my head, but water examples would be like the Cuyahoga River fire or dumping nuclear waste into the Delaware River. Very severe infractions like that could result in jail time. Well, actually, prison time because it's a federal offense. Next is a green tax. This is a tax that is assessed on environmentally undesirable activities. So typically, this would be passed down to the individual. So we would see taxes on the use of, for example, in Europe, there's a tax on the use of diesel fuels. In America, well, another example would be in Europe. In France, they have a tax on gasoline. Um, so that would be environmentally undesirable activities using an internal combustion engine. Um, so there's a tax to be paid on that. Finally, there's a tax credit, and this is the opposite of a green tax. It's a reduction in the amount of taxes that one must pay in order to um, exchange for some desirable action. So, for example, this is referred to as a carrot and stick approach, I believe, as well. And it essentially boils down to, for example, to incentivize someone to stop driving their car so much, there might be a tax incentive that you're able to. Well, I shouldn't talk about this hypothetically because this is a real policy. So, if you drive an electric car, you get a rebate from the government, which isn't the same exactly as a tax credit, but I think it gets the point across very well. They're encouraging Americans to purchase electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles or hydrogen vehicles. And the way they're doing this is not by increasing taxes on internal combustion engines, but rather by giving credits to Americans who decide to drive a cleaner vehicle. The next slide is about subsidiaries and cap and trade programs. So a subsidiary is just a financial assistance given by the government, or a subsidy, sorry, is just a financial assistance program distributed by the government to promote desired activities. So essentially what this is referring to is basically the government will cover part of the cost of a certain activity in order to incentivize this happening. So, for example, in something that actually harms the air of our country, but it is an example of a subsidiary, would be the price of gasoline. If you ever wonder why Americans happen to have larger vehicles that are less fuel efficient, it's because in other countries, they don't have subsidized gasoline. Even if you go to oil exporters like Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Russia, these countries do not have as cheap gasoline as we do in the United States. This is because the government subsidizes a portion of the gasoline in our country in order for average Americans to be able to traverse our amazingly large country without actually having to increase taxes to create some greener approach like public transportation that would take way too long to complete in a short 2 to 6 year election cycle, unfortunately. But that's an example. Another example would be since like Egypt, there has been government efforts to create subsidies for farmers at times when farming is unprofitable. You'll have farmers switch to other professions, which leads to a lack of food production, which means that everyone is going to be starving. So instead, what these subsidies do is they help farmers maintain a stable income, and the government basically buys food from them. So when there's a surplus, the government will buy extra food that the farmers have produced, and when there is a shortage, that means that these farmers are still producing food because they've had the subsidies to keep them financially afloat. The other type of program is known as a cap and trade program, and this is a program where essentially there's regulations like the Clean Air Act, for example, where they set an upper limit on how much pollution one can emit, and then usually it's companies, but sometimes proposals can apply to individuals as well. They will receive a certain amount of credits, and in these credits, it basically says how many carbon, whatever the measurement is, parts per million, or molecules, or there's very different ways to measure it. But the permits say how much carbon you're allowed to emit, and if you know I'm not going to emit all of the carbon that I'm given permit-wise, I can trade some of my credits to increase the cap of a larger institution. So for example, me as an individual, I drive a bike to school. I don't fly anywhere, and I don't really use that much carbon compared to like ExxonMobil, who uses a lot of carbon. So ExxonMobil would go onto the marketplace and they would look for someone to buy credits from. And since I won't be using mine, I'm looking to sell them. So I get money and ExxonMobil gets to pollute more. Now, the way these systems work is they set a cap, and it doesn't matter who does the pollution, they're going to get to that cap. It doesn't matter if it's spread out equally or unequally. And the thought process is that eventually the financial disincentivization of air pollution, as well as a gradual lowering of of the limit, means that companies will be forced by the market to adapt or pay hefty fines. This is also known as permit trading, And it has been successful in various countries. For example, in the United States, it actually helped to reduce sulfur pollution from coal-fired power plants in the 1990s, and in general has made coal, I believe it's 2 to 3 times cleaner than it was in the 20th century in the United States. But a downside is that pollution, since it can be unevenly distributed, can become concentrated in areas where these individual industries, think factories, power plants, manufacturing, those cities would have much more carbon output than a city with, like New York, with an excellent public transit system and a lack of manufacturing and high carbon output businesses. So, since you can pollute wherever you want, typically companies are going to congregate into certain areas, and thus they're going to overpollute those areas, which obviously is bad. Finally, you can see a diagram about the different approaches to reducing air pollution. If I can zoom in here, will you let me zoom in, please? Yes, perfect. Okay, so we talked about the many different ways that we can reduce air pollution, whether it's through legislation, tax incentives, taxation, cap and trade, subsidies, some of the more advanced ideas. And oh man, I'm having a very hard time reading this PowerPoint on my phone. Yeah, this is just a diagram looking at the different ways that we can use technology to do more advanced processes such as carbon capture and the policies needed for such. So once again, so here's an example of a smokestack scrubber. Essentially, you can think of it as a catalytic converter for a factory that uses a smokestack. So the first step is that the emissions from coal or another heat source are burnt. If you don't know how a coal factory works, basically a coal factory, they burn the coal heats the water, the water steam is used to pressurize pipes, and these pressurized pipes move turbines, which move gears, and that creates electricity through mechanical stuff. Anyway, the emissions from the burnt coal are obviously hot, so they rise in the air, and they're made of gas, so they're lighter in the air, and they go up and into the smokestack, which is the exhaust, right? Next, they mist water, and this water is going to stick to many of the pollutants, and it makes it easier to filter out. Also, limestone, of course, if you're familiar with the state of Florida, we're just one big piece of limestone, and our water is filtered through that limestone, and that's how we have our natural aquifers. So, of course, nature knows best, and the limestone in this case is being used to trap pollutants as they sink when the water is misted on top of them. Now, at the third step, we can see that the clean air is released through the top, and the dirty, sooty, cooler water flows away, and they remove the contaminants from the water, and then they reuse the water. And finally, moving over to the policies section. So again, they're talking about different examples of policies. We already went over that. So let's look at the diagram here, talking about cap and trade. So the cap is an upper limit that's set, and it says this is the total amount of pollution that you can emit. Next, you can see that these pollution credits are issued, and the next step would be that producers can sell leftover credits to others that have exceeded their limit. And yeah, I mean, we already went over how this marketplace works. But the incentive of it is that it's a market-driven policy. And what that means is it gives producers the freedom to choose how they want to meet the requirements. Do they want to pony up the money to purchase more credits? Do they want to just pay the fines, which are 99 times out of 100 going to be more than just purchasing credits? And then finally, they could just stop polluting as much and then sell their credits to make money back, which they reinvest in the company and then they make more profits. So it basically is attempting to cut out one of the major problems with environmental pollution when it comes to industry and business is that it's too expensive and it's not profitable for these companies to do so, and that causes problems, obviously. So what you need to realize from cap and trade is that this is a solution where they're trying to essentially focus on all of the problems that are caused by other ways of disincentivizing pollution and say, look, this one isn't the government telling you to do, it's the free market. This one isn't forcing you to change. You can pay the fines, or you can buy more credits, or you can pollute less. And if you do pollute less, usually it'll cost more. For example, for a company to switch to solar power on all their businesses, it would be a lot more expensive. But if they're able to use less carbon credits, then it incentivizes them to find cheaper ways to become greener, and thus they'll have more money. So overall, it's a good solution. It does have its flaws, but yeah, I think it's an excellent solution. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much, and have a great day.